So here's what your carburetor may sound like if your car is running poorly because of a dirty carburetor. Alright, we're going to start by taking the ends off the carburetor, removing these bolts so we can take each bowl off. Each one of these bolts have a little rubber or plastic grommet on the end of them to seal the bowl from fuel from coming out. So make sure you don't lose that. And you see I pulled this one and the fuel poured out of it. So that's what they're made to do, is seal that fuel from coming out. I'm just showing you here, each side has its own bolt length. You can't mix them up. One side's longer than the other one because of how it's made, basically the metering valve. Now I just pulled the bowl off and I'm showing you the float and this is the metering block. Has a gasket that goes around it. Inspect the gasket, make sure it's not torn up. I recommend you get these blue ones because they're reusable. Any of the other ones usually aren't. I've been in this carburetor lately. I actually just went through it and I had a gas tank rust out, and I'm just pulling it back apart and checking it, and it was pretty dirty. So right now I'm taking out the jets, carburetor jets. These meter the amount of fuel that goes in your carburetor. They're both pretty dirty. This will cause your carburetor to run pretty bad. It'll pop and sputter, not get the fuel it needs. Now I'm gonna leave these gaskets on, but I'm just showing you I'm gonna spray all this rust buildup that's on the inside of it from the inside of the gas tank. I just had to replace the piece in the center of that I'll show you in a minute. It's called the power valve, and these carbs are known to have bad power valves when you get backfires through the intakes, but mine doesn't, so I'm not going to replace it. But it does come in the rebuild kit that I ordered, which I will show you. It all comes as a part. All these gaskets, the needles, power valve all come in this kit, and you can replace it. So I'll show you here in a minute. So next, nothing else is holding this metering block on, this square piece, so you can pry it off when you're done with that. I'll show you this in a second. I'm just putting the jets back in so I don't lose them. Sometimes you can get different size jets too, so you want to make sure you got the right number on the right side, but these ones are the same. See, that just popped right off. No more bolts holding it on. The bolts go through and sandwich that metering block in. So this is the power valve I was talking about. It's a 1-inch wrench. We'll take this power valve out. If you want to take it out, you can, but mine wasn't bad, so I didn't. So the next thing you want to do is get your carburetor cleaner and spray each port out. All these ports are going to be filled with that rust or whatever contaminants in your float bowl. You'll spray it in one hole, it'll just spray out the other hole, so watch out, watch your eyes. They're all linked together, they're all passages, but I'll just show you. I'm going to spray every one of them and I spray them twice. I'll spray them in the way that they go in and the way they come out, and just so we can back flush anything that's in the carb. Something might not come out one way. The one port might be smaller than the other one. If you're spraying it into the small port, it might clog up. So it's a good thumb of reference to spray both in the in port and the out port to back flush the system. And these ports actually go directly into the throat of the carburetor, so where the air comes in. So I'll spray those out. They're usually not clogged because the orifices of the inlet of the carburetor are a little bit bigger than the metering valves. The metering valves have small orifice all the way through them. Here's the rebuild kit. There's the gaskets. I just replaced these gaskets. As I said, if you buy the blues, they're reusable. Highly recommend them. This is the third time they've actually been out. So here's the float bowl. And I'm just going to spray this float bowl out. And what you're really looking for is, let's see if your float goes up and down. And that needle, there's that little needle tip on the end where I'm moving up and down. You see it moving up and down, how it's sticking and falling down slower. That means it's sticking a little bit. So you want to spray it out and move it up and down until it falls exactly as fast as that float falls. And I'll show you right there. So after you do that, the only thing you have left to do on this side is the accelerator pump. So it's just 4 Phillips head screws. You remove the 4 Phillips head screws off of the accelerator pump, and you take the 4 screws out. And then it's just this diaphragm. Now you want to check this diaphragm for rips or tears. You definitely want to clean all the trash off of it. Fuel directly comes in here, and as you can see, rust is just pulling in the bottom. It also has this little piece of rubber that diaphragms fuel from coming in and out when the accelerator pump lever is moved. So if you got a new one, take it out, put it in. That one's just been recently replaced. So, and if you're worried about this, you can only put it on one way. I put it on backwards right there to show you, but you can only put it on, it only goes on one way. So if you have it on the wrong way, don't worry about it. The accelerator pump cover will not fit on it, so you cannot mess this up. I was worried about that when I first started rebuild carburetors. So after you got that, you're going to want to flip the carburetor around or stick this end cap on, doesn't matter. I think I'm going to leave it off. So, all right, so I put the long bolts in, and I'm showing you right there. I want to show you right now that the short bolts will not fit, so you don't have to worry about putting the wrong bolts in the wrong side. This side's bolts are a little bit longer than the other side because of the metering block, the piece you're sandwiching in between the carburetor and the float bowl. So stick these back in. Use your new rubber gaskets, or they're actually plastic or Teflon or something. So you're going to want to replace those so it doesn't leak. And at this time, you want to make sure when you're putting that back on that the accelerator pump lever is underneath that red spring. I didn't do it on this. I had a mistake. I'll show you later, but we'll get that in a little bit. So I'm basically just showing you after I pulled this side, the exact same thing. They mimic each other, except this side doesn't have the metering block. It just has this cover that meters all the fuel flow on this side. So this little cover has a special key on it. It's not a flathead or anything, but you can use a flathead like I did. Find the one that fits it best and just barely turn it out, and it'll come out if you don't have the special tool from Holley. I've never actually had the special tool. I just use a little flathead screwdriver, and it seems to work fine just as long as you don't over torque the bolts. So again, this one doesn't have a metering block per se. It's just this little cover that helps direct fuel in this side, and this side usually doesn't get as dirty. It doesn't really have the intricate moving parts that, or the intricate passageways that the metering block does. So you just spray these out, and as you can see, they go directly in the carburetor. So I'll flip it up right here in a second and watch. You can watch fuel go down the throat of the carburetor. So you see what I'm talking about. All right. So we're going to proceed to put these back in. And like I said, just hand tighten them. Don't torque them hard because you're going to strip them. The flathead isn't made for this style bit. Actually, I've never seen anything with this style bit, so I'm going to guarantee unless you're a carburetor specialist, you will not have one of these. So if you put it on too tight this time, you're going to be kicking yourself the next time you have to clean it. So make sure you don't do that. Hand tight is just fine. You want to replace that gasket back there if you have the gasket kit, but mine is reusable because they're blues. All right, so I'm going to show you how to take the needle out. I didn't do it on the other side because the other side seemed pretty good. This one wasn't sticky either. Anytime you take this part out, you have to reset the needle, the float height, basically. This controls how much gas is filled up in that side of the carburetor. So the farther down the needle goes, the less amount of gas you'll have in that side, and the farther more higher up the needle is, the more gas you'll have. The needle is, that floats up on top of the gas and pushes that needle up, and it shuts the fuel. But basically you're just checking to see if that needle goes up and down freely. If it sticks in any way, shape, or form, it has a chance of sticking and flooding your carburetor. So you want to set this, the top screw actually turns the needle down in to where you set, and the flathead screw part is just the lock screw. So I'm screwing it down to basically where I want it. You'll have to adjust it on the car, but I'll show you here in a second an easy way to adjust it. So, and don't forget, there's little gaskets on the back of all these little bolts. So you're going to replace that with all your kit that you got. So I'm showing you the float goes up, pushes that needle up, and stops it. So you take the screw off when the car is running, and basically you turn that screw at the top, you turn that needle down until either gas is just trickling out. So you want to turn it up slightly until you get a slight flow of gas trickling out of that weep hole, and then you want to lock that needle down and then put that cap back on the end, and that's how you adjust your where your float's supposed to be. That hole that I'm tightening up right now is actually made for adjusting this piece, and fuel coming out of it will just a trickle of it is how it's supposed to be set. So that's exactly what it's made for. And you adjust how much fuel is in that float side by that flathead screw part, by the bolt on it. The flathead screw part locks it down. So now I'm just putting the little screws back in, sticking them in the sides. We're just going to be wrapping this up now. Not too much left to see. The only other thing I would say is there's a tube that transfers the gas from one side to the other. You'll see it's a little aluminum tube. Just make sure that goes in and everything lines up. But other than that, make sure everything else is working properly. I like to spray out the throat of the carb a little bit, but mine wasn't dirty, so I really didn't take much time doing that. There's the gunk that came out of mine. That's a pretty substantial amount of stuff. Like I said, that tank rusted out, but here's that kit. It's there's new power valves in it, every new gasket, new accelerator pump diaphragm, new needles, which is the reason I bought the kit. They've already been replaced. And I'm gonna show you me reinstalling it on the car in case this is your first rodeo. So Here's me just trying to get a camera angle. So you want to put your new gasket on. That kit actually comes with a new gasket also. I just reused my old one. There's nothing the matter with it. So I'm going to set everything down. And the first thing I like to do when I put everything on is you want to get your bolts aligned with that gasket. Make sure they go through that gasket. I'm going to show you what not to do first. So do not put a bolt in and tighten it all the way in, because you have to move the carburetor back and forth. So I'm going to stick 2 bolts in and show you what that does when you do that. So I'm setting this down here, setting the bolt in, and I'm going to tighten these 2 in and show you that if you tighten, even though the bolts might go in on this side on the carburetor gasket, if you're having trouble getting them in the other side, it's because you need a little bit of wiggle in them to get the bolts to go in. So everything has to move before you can tighten it down. So start every bolt before you tighten any of them to the max amount of torque. So right here I'm showing you have to loosen up this side, and then I can start this side now. So now I'm able to start the bolts in here before I couldn't. So do it equally. I like to do it in a cross pattern. I don't really think it matters. Just tighten them a little bit at a time until you get them torqued down. It really doesn't take a lot of torque to hold a carburetor on, so you shouldn't really be putting a lot of torque. Maybe 20 foot-pounds, 25 foot-pounds will be fine. All right. So if you have this carb, especially, I ran a manual choke on mine. Mine had an electric choke, but the manual choke's just easier to deal with. So you want to put the back bolt holding the clamp that holds the choke in first before you tighten down your choke lever. Now you either want to mark where your choke was, because it has to have a full range of motion to open and close, and if you don't know where that is, your choke isn't going to work correctly. So you want to make sure you have that, and make sure you get the vacuum lines also. That's the PCV valve, and that goes to the vacuum advance on the distributor. Do not forget them. Also, the carburetor has 2 ports on the bottom that's capped off. Make sure they're capped off, or go to a vacuum, which you have ran before. All right, so now I'm just hooking the throttle linkage back up and sticking it back on. Doesn't have to be very tight. And then I just put this spring on. My spring's a little shoddy, so I actually routed a little different than it's supposed to be, but it'll be fine. You just want that to return the throttle. So now put your gas line on, tighten it down, and the only thing you have left after this is your filter. So stick your filter and your wing nut on. You can just finger tighten this part and it'll be just fine. So that wraps it up. I'm going to show you what it sounds like after it's all done, after your carb is rebuilt. All right, bonus. Here's the part I was telling you about. When you install your carb, you want to make sure that the accelerator pump arm linkage is underneath this red spring. If it's not, this accelerator pump will not move, and your problem will not be fixed. It'll actually be worse. Your car will stall and turn off if this isn't like this. Here's how it's supposed to be. This accelerator pump arm has to be under this red spring. When you move your throttle, the accelerator pump engages almost immediately and sprays fuel into your carburetor. So look, even that little bit of movement, and that's how it should be. It should be that tight. Your accelerator pump should engage immediately after you start